knows a thing or two about that particular series is former Diamond Dog Luke Alexander. And Luke, when I bring up that series, I know I'm not going to let you say walk-off to start here. We'll get to that. But what is the first thing that you think of?
I just, just the whole state in general, especially growing up in Mississippi, you really choose between State or Ole Miss for the most part. I know it's changed a little bit, but it's just, high school baseball is winding down right now. What better time for the two teams to match up? State coming off a good weekend last weekend, Ole Miss having a good year. It's going to be some exciting baseball and fun to watch for sure.
You played in these series against Ole Miss with three different head coaches. I don't think Coach Cannizzaro or Coach Henderson might have been around long enough to develop a real relationship with Ole Miss. I know for a fact Coach Cohen was not the biggest fan of the Ole Miss Rebels. What was his message to you guys before y'all would take on this team?
For the most part, his coach speak was, just staying within ourselves, don't worry about everything else. But then he would come on with a little side note and said, you know exactly what this means. This means just a little bit more. The SEC says it just means more. So in this series, in the state of Mississippi, it just means just a little bit more than these other matchups throughout the SEC season.
So let's talk about that 2018 season a little bit, because in some ways kind of similar to what Mississippi State's going through. You had a coaching change, albeit much earlier in the season. The Ole Miss series is kind of where that season turned and got you guys going again. And that was a really good Ole Miss team. They might have been number one in the nation when they came to Dudy Noble. You guys got 2 out of 3. What do you remember about that series?
The first thing that comes to my mind is just us, just struggling a little bit at the time. I'm just going to say it like it is. We were struggling early on in the season. We had that coaching change, and then, like you said, Ole Miss coming in really highly ranked. But again, I go back to it just meant a little bit more. And I believe we actually got rained out on Friday night, if I can remember correctly.
That's correct.
And we played a doubleheader on Saturday and then one on Sunday. Even when all the new Dudy Noble was, I don't even think they had the upper deck then. But, just like you said, it was just a turning point, and I can just remember that being the flipping point for the rest of the season. We went on to sweep some series against Arkansas and Florida that year, and it was just a catalyst. But like I said, it just meant a little bit more, and when we got that and we won that series, it just propelled us into the rest of the season.
So I'll tell you that I remember this pretty clearly. State was having a football open practice, so all of the media were over there at that when game 1 started, and somebody says we could hear the cheers, and we're like, wonder what's going on. So somebody checks Twitter, and it's like 4-0 Mississippi State, and we're all like, what's happening over there? Because nobody expected you guys to win. But like you mentioned, you split the Saturday doubleheader, and then let's talk about that Sunday game where you have the big hit, the walk-off home run there in the 11th inning. What do you remember the at bat? Can you take us through it?
Yeah, I can't remember the exact pitches early on. I can remember the pitch being a fastball up in the zone. It seems like it was almost just right down the middle, up in the zone, and I put a good swing on it, and ended up winning us the game that day. I can just remember. I think Jake. Which, when I say this, everybody's going to be like, well, of course. I think Jake was like 5 for 5 that day.
Oh, yeah,
and I think he just rolled. We always made fun of Jake. We'd always say your hits are 46 hoppers through the 4-hole. And if I can remember correctly, and I may be wrong, it seems like he hit one of those 46 hoppers through the 4-hole. And it seemed like he was on base. And then, just got that pitch up in the zone. I can't remember if it was the first pitch or the second or third, but I got a good swing on it. Gotro actually sent me that video not too long ago. Made me laugh a little bit when he sent it.
You got a good memory, Luke. Jake Mangum 5 for 5 with 4 runs scored in this game. So not only was he getting on base, you guys were knocking him in. You had three RBI in this game. So you get a walk-off against your rival. That's something kids think about all the time when they're playing baseball out in the backyard. Not a lot of people think they're going to do it twice, and that's exactly what you got to do in the Governor's Cup, where you have the walk-off hit as well. That's one where Mike Biano walks Jake Mangum, who's the go-ahead run, to pitch to you. That you had to take that as a challenge.
There's no doubt, and I'm pretty sure that you can go on YouTube, and I don't remember who was put it on YouTube, but they asked me that question, and I said, I give props to Bianco for being a smart guy. I'm sure Jake was hitting about 350 at the time, and I was notorious for hitting 222 for some reason. And absolutely, it's a no-brainer. You walk Jake, even though it puts the lead and run at the plate or at first,
yeah,
and you pitch to me. But and I think I said in the interview, I took it as a little disrespect, but it helped me in that at bat. When your back's against the wall, especially, you're gonna do whatever you can to get out of that wall. But it seems like Caracci, I believe it was pitching, and I'll never forget he threw a first pitch slider, and I'll never forget it. I stood back from the box and thought, I hope he does not throw that again. and he ended up coming back with a fastball. And that's when I ended up hitting in that opposite field gap and scoring Jake. Thank goodness Jake's really, really fast.
Yeah.
Hope he comes back off that IL soon so I can get to watching him play again. But, yeah, like I said, Caracci threw that first pitch slider, and I was like, please don't do that again.
So you had 3 walk-offs that year, too. 2 against Ole Miss and 1 against Washington in the College World Series. What is this? Why were you such a walk-off machine?
If I had the answer, I would love to know the answer. I don't know what it was or is, but I think for me, it was just not trying to do too much at the plate. Having my normal, just good AB, just trying to see pitches, just trying to slow the game down. A lot of people in that instance, the game will get fast on them. Say that was been my freshman year, absolutely. The game probably would have been going 400 miles an hour. But I had been there. I've been in those situations. I'll never forget my freshman year against UCLA. And I was kind of in that same moment, and I ended up striking out at the end of the game. And I can remember thinking, I don't want to feel that feeling ever again. And I don't know if I ever ended a game like that again for the most part. But I think it was just a test to me slowing the game down, just taking a deep breath, and just honestly just having a great hitting coach like Gotro that just gave me confidence in myself for the most part.
Let's go back a year to 2017 when you guys were up in Oxford and you swept the Rebels up there. That was, as I recall, that was another good Ole Miss team, and this was the time where State and Ole Miss were really year in, year out, two of the best teams in college baseball. And you went up there and got the sweep. All those games were really, really close. What was Cannizzaro telling you guys in the dugout? Because that was his first real experience with Ole Miss as the Mississippi State skipper.
No doubt. What I can remember from Cannizzaro is just a lot more intense. In 2018 it was Henderson. It was just more laid back. Just 2 different coaching, approaches, and just real intense. And even though he was there at that short amount of time, he understood exactly what it meant. Rooker, obviously, that year was just elite. I think he propelled us in most games. But, for the most part, Cannizzaro's just staying on us to keep going. One's not enough. Not to beat them once is not enough. 2's not enough. Let's go ahead and get that sweep. So that was really the most that he was doing, is just staying on us to keep going, to not just be content with just winning the series. We want to get that sweep.
One thing that I don't know if a lot of fans know, because the rivalry is so intense amongst the fan bases, is that you guys, State and Ole Miss, you guys grow up together. You play travel baseball together. You know each other from high school. Who was somebody on the Ole Miss squad that you were close with?
I would say probably the most close was Thomas Dillard, which he had a great career at Ole Miss. I would say him and Kessinger, and then Ryan Olenek as well. Those were probably the 3 guys that I knew the most, because I played with Dillard and Kessinger with the Doolin Dodgers. They would come up and play with us in some tournaments, even though they was a grade below us. And then Olenek, I don't even know how that relationship started, but he was another guy as well that I was pretty close to.
You got about 60 seconds left. What was your relationship like with Mike Bianco in the recruiting process?
It was very short. You know, I committed to state going into the 8th grade.
Yeah.
So I was a young buck. And it seems like all that just happened so fast, and it seems like Doolin's went down for a thing, and I talked to Bianco, and, you know, he was ready to offer, and then I went to camp at State, and I knew exactly where I wanted to go. I wanted to be a Bulldog. I wanted to experience, luckily and humbly, exactly what I got to experience: 4 super regionals, and all that, and a College World Series run. So, like I said, it was short-lived because I was so young and I knew exactly where I wanted to go.
Luke, really